I've ridden the Honda CB650R a few times. I borrowed one from a friend last autumn for a few days while researching my next bike, and I like it. But now I've put a few miles on my Triumph Trident, I thought it would be worth revisiting the Honda and posting a direct head-to-head comparison. I'm also hoping to do a video with the Yamaha MT-07 and or the XSR 700 soon, so stick around for that. But for now, let's take a look at the good and the bad points of the CB650R in no particular order. What struck me immediately when getting back on it yesterday was how much smaller it felt than my Trident. Now the Triumph's not a particularly large bike, but the CB felt positively cramped in comparison, particularly for my legs, which felt very tucked up, even more so than on the Trident, which isn't amazing, and I've ordered some adjustable pegs to try and get more comfortable. I don't think the Honda's case is helped by the bars. The overall riding position is definitely less upright and more sporty than the Trident. The bars are also a fraction wider, so the overall effect is one of being hunkered down with your face closer to the clocks, which are also smaller than on the Triumph. I rode the bike for about 45 minutes yesterday and was quite surprised that my left wrist began aching slightly after such a short time. This is not something I felt on the Trident, and which I can only attribute to the more sporty riding position of the Honda. I'm 6'1" or 1.87 m, so I definitely say that if you're over 6 foot, I would bear this in mind. The next thing to strike me, and I have to say this, was the lovely gear change on the Honda. Satisfyingly snickety, almost like the gearbox on a Mazda MX-5 if you've ever driven one of those. Overall, the gear changes were smoother than on my Trident, though this may be because the bike I was testing had done a few thousand miles, whereas my Trident barely run in. I also found that finding neutral on the Honda was less easy than on the Triumph. Not overly difficult, but I did notice the difference. Notwithstanding the comments I made earlier about the Honda feeling smaller, the tank is much wider than the Trident's and offers a slightly less natural shape to grip, at least with my legs. The Honda certainly has got the edge on power. Being a 4-cylinder, it does need revving a bit more to access the power, but not as much as you might think. It hasn't quite got the meaty feeling of the 3-cylinder Trident low down in the rev range, but I was surprised by how close it gets. You can feel the extra 15 horsepower when you give it the beans, but other than that, I'd say on overall engine excitement, it's a draw. The noise is good too, although, to be honest, being a fan of the unique 3-cylinder rush you get from a Triumph, I knew the Honda would never quite be able to beat that. Probably the thing that disappointed me the most with the Honda was its fueling around town. After the very silky Trident, I had to concentrate more on the Honda to make sure that I didn't stall or over rev when moving through traffic in first or second, or when moving off from a standstill. You really have to dose the clutch lever with greater accuracy, and maybe that's what gave me the wrist ache. So what about comfort? Well, as you know, if you've seen my videos on the Trident, the suspension on that bike is firm. Too firm for my liking, but it is bearable. Now the rear damping on the Honda was slightly better, and by better I mean softer, although I must admit I was expecting it to be more comfortable. The damping on the forks felt firmer than on the Trident, so if I had to call it, I'd say the Honda suspension is very slightly more compliant, but the seat is less well padded, and as a taller rider I couldn't move backwards as much as I can on the Triumph on the seat, so overall I'm going to have to call that a draw too. The brakes were fine. The front discs feel about the same as those on the Triumph. In fact, I think they might actually be the same Nissin twin pot calipers. I'm not sure about that. We're quite a way off Brembo Stylemas, but the Nissins do the job. The rear brake was typical of most bikes I've ridden, wooden and pretty much ineffectual. The Triumph's rear brake is certainly a lot more convincing and genuinely useful, so a win there, a slight win for the Triumph. So in conclusion, the Honda CB650R is very easy to ride and would make a great first bike, but not necessarily more so than the Trident. And I think it all comes down to what you're looking for. This might sound a bit strange, but the Honda rides like it looks, and so does the Triumph. The CB650R reminds me of the bike I passed my test on a few years ago. Perfectly acceptable, perfectly accessible. It just doesn't quite do it for me anymore. And I say anymore because the Honda feels and looks just a bit old school, particularly compared to the freshness of the Trident. When you see the Trident, when you get on it, when you ride it, you sort of go, ooh, this feels good, this feels different, it feels modern. When I rode the Honda for a couple of days last year, I liked it and I was seriously considering pulling the trigger on one. But then I saw the Trident, looked at the specs and crossed my fingers that it would be as nice to ride as it looked in those first photos. And it does, it just does. Think of the 80 horsepower Trident as being a milder version of the fantastic, if slightly mental, Street Triple. I used to own the 120 horsepower RS. The 95 horsepower CB650R is, I suppose, a milder version of the 145 horsepower CB1000R, but it still feels less fun, less new than the Trident. It all depends what you're after. If you want a good commuter bike that won't attract too much unwanted attention when you park it, which has enough power for most situations and which will never ever go wrong, probably, then the Honda's for you. If on the other hand you're looking for something slightly less sensible, something a bit sexier, dare I say, then try the Triumph. It's horses for courses really. One bike isn't better than the other, they're just different, like choosing chicken or a steak at a restaurant. Both are good, they're just different. Anyway, that's just about it for this first head-to-head. A comparison with the Yamaha MT-07 will be coming as soon as my local dealer gets the 2021 demo bike in, so stick around for that, because I rode one a couple of years ago and I think the engine might just have the edge over the Tridents. I'm also due to get my hands on the new Triumph Speed Triple next month, so exciting times ahead. We shall see, but in the meantime, as ever, thanks for watching.